an extension of our efforts in building the community of practice in the area of HPC in health. And I think that gave us opportunity to have contact with experts at the National Laboratory, Hago National Laboratory in the USA. And we have one of the experts from that laboratory with us today in the person of Dr. Matthew Joel, who is the facilitator. So I can assure you that this is going to be a loaded tutorial. And I welcome everybody. Just relax and let's open our minds. Whatever questions you have, you can pen them down. After the presentation, there will be opportunity for you to ask your questions. And I wish us a very wonderful tutorial session today. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof, for that wonderful opening remarks. Okay, so before I call on Mr. Matthew Joe, I just want to take us through the objectives of this particular session. So we had the first session last week, which will dealt on what federated learning is and how it works. So for today's session, we're going to be dwelling more on federation node, setting up a federation node, all that it entails. And for participants here, I just want to read out the outcomes, what's expected at the end of the 3 sessions. Okay, so for those that missed last session, we'll try and see if we can send you the slides so you can catch up. So for the learning outcomes, we expect that at the end of the whole series of this federated learning, you should be able to explain what federated learning is and how a federation round works. You should be able to identify basic compute, storage, software, and network requirements for a federation node. You should be able to set up a node and connect it to a federated platform. And also, you should be able to configure and run a simple federation from start to finish. All right. I think this will help to also whet our appetite so we know what to expect. And if you have questions, please just put it down in the chat box or just note it down somewhere. We'll have 10 minutes after the presentation to harvest your questions. I want to believe Mr. Matthew Joel is ready for us. Please, if you're ready, can you please unmute your mic? You have the floor, please. You have 50 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. It's great to meet all of you. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see everything okay?
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So just a quick roadmap of what we're going to cover. I wasn't in your guys' first session. The timings didn't work out, but I'm basically going to go over sort of who Argonne is and how we're going to collaborate with you guys. I'm going to go over federated learning and differential privacy, which it sounds like you guys covered a little bit in your previous session, so that's good. That'll just be a quick refresher. I'm going to go into the specific software that you would be using to set up a federation if you wanted to. I'm going to go over the use cases that we've tested and sort of the ongoing collaboration we have with you guys. And I'm also going to go over the future steps and some of the new projects we're trying to work on and some of the things that haven't been done yet. And then lastly, I'm going to end on sort of standards and sort of how to build something that's maintainable and more robust. Okay, so who we are, as Argonne National Laboratory. So we are a U.S. Department of Energy lab, meaning we are government funded. So we're federally funded and we do a wide variety of different kinds of research that sometimes that's in the physical sciences, sometimes computational, and also, of course, in the life sciences and in biomedical. So material stuff, computing stuff, and also a lot of biology stuff. First and foremost, the lab was actually started as an energy and materials lab. So this photo is from our campus, and this is a particle accelerator. It's the advanced photon source. So it's used for bright X-rays, and that was actually useful for developing medical imagery technologies. And so sort of from that initial contraption at the lab, they became more of a biomedicine oriented kind of thing. And so now they do all sorts of work still originally in energy, but also in biomedical infrastructure and genomics and clinical work as well. And yeah, more recently, the biggest thing is it's a very big hub for supercomputing. So just in that image there, that's called the Aurora supercomputer, and that's the third fastest globally right now. It has around, I think, 65,000 GPUs on board. And the best part is it's built for open science. It's any researchers that work here can use it. It's not, for a particular mission or goal. It's widely available and open to use. And just a little bit on my group and how that fits in the lab. So we are part of the data science and learning division. So that's a division of the lab that focuses on machine learning and different kinds of computational problems. The principal investigator, my boss, his name is Ravi Maduri. He's been doing federated learning and scientific computing stuff for a while, and he knows it all very well. And sort of what our lab's goal is and what we want to build is software that lets institutions, train models on sensitive data without moving it, because there's a lot of value in that, which I'm sure you guys are aware of. And having an easy, deployable solution, I think, is really one of the main roadblocks right now. And so we're engineering this for, real partner sites, not just simulation in a lab. And just a quick bit about me. So I'm a machine learning researcher. That's my position there. I look at specifically getting these federated algorithms to genomics and clinical data. I've only been here a couple months, so I'm still pretty new to it. But for my background, I have a bachelor's in math and computer science and then a master's in statistics. Okay, so the two ideas, which I guess you guys have already covered, but let's go over again, is federated learning and differential privacy. So you really need both. Federated learning is, of course, the one that comes up more, but you really need both to develop like a really trustworthy cross-institution computing environment. Um, so as the most valuable data can't move. You can think of that as hospital clinic data, research university data, biobank data, right? Maybe there's privacy regulations, maybe there's data sovereignty things, maybe it's a government thing, or maybe it's just the sheer volume of how large it is, right? We might run into these issues where we can't just put everything together and analyze it. It is more convenient and as fast as that would be. That just can't be an option for a lot of valuable data types. So we need a different approach. And two ideas make this possible. One, of course, is federated learning, which you guys are pretty well versed with. And the second is differential privacy. So in federated learning, just to recap, the data stays where it is, but conceptually what's happening is that the model is traveling around to the data sites. So the data stays, the model moves. A differential privacy is a important concept which it guarantees that a single individual cannot be singled out. And what I mean by that is that if you have an individual in the data set, you would not be able to tell if he is or in the data set. So that's re-identifying, that person might be risky and give up their privacy, so we don't want that. So in the federated learning, in one sentence, bring the model to the data, not the data to the model. Each institution keeps its data in place. The model visits, learns locally, and moves on. And sort of what that looks like in terms of an actual setup. So the first step would be that this model is training locally at each site. So imagine, you have two or three sites there. Then there's two or three models initially, and that model is at its own individual site. It's training. Then it sends only its updates, so the gradients or the whatever parameters, whatever kind of model you're building. So then those parameters will go to step 3 and get aggregated. So now we have a global model that has, that's been built from all the training of the local sites. And then basically if there's multiple rounds, then what's going to happen is those new aggregate statistics are going to get sent back, and then you're going to train again. And you're just going to keep going round for round until the model converges or until you hit your accuracy metric of choice or your loss function is minimized or whatever else it may be. But, the main principle is that we have all these local sites. They're going to train, send updates. We're going to combine everything and then send it back again. And that's the sort of the heart of the training round. Some computational tasks will have many rounds. Some will be, like sort of a one and done thing. It just depends on the individual nature of the problem. And so what exactly is staying at a site and what is leaving at the site? So patient data, clinical records, genomic data, anything identifiable, as in you could point that to a person. That's what we want to never leave the site. And within the federation, of course, we need to share something, and that's going to be model parameters, aggregated statistics, and then noise, which we're going to get to in a little bit. And just a quick recap of centralized versus federated. So in the centralized scenario, right, we would have to sort of put all the data together in one pool. And there's a very big privacy exposure in that because the data is moving around. Maybe it's not over a secure channel. Maybe the pool itself might have a bad actor in it. So there has to be that one central custodian, which is a big problem. And it's hard to scale that as well. It's only one site. It's whatever they can support, whatever they can hold, however strong their compute is. And it's only really works when data is freely shareable and fairly small. And in the federated scenario, we keep it each at each site. The data is never moving, really. The only exposure is at an individual site. It's designed to scale, really, because as more sites increase and, as one site gets bigger, the load of another site does not get bigger, right? So it keeps it scalable. And, if data is sensitive, sovereign, it works very well. Okay, so then you might say, okay, it seems like federated learning has addressed most of the problem. Why do we need differential privacy then? So differential privacy works on adding noise to a model's updates or statistics. And the reason why we need that is because of something called a membership inference attack. So basically what can happen is even if, one of the federated sites is only sending out its summary statistics or, the model weights or whatever, there is a way to reverse engineer those weights to identify an individual. So you can imagine that defeats the whole purpose. If a local site sends out an update and imagine, you have a bad actor on the network or someone malicious, they would be able to sort of reverse engineer those model weights and actually be able to tell the original source data and find if an individual is inside. And again, that's called membership inference. And so the problem basically is that even aggregates can still leak informations about individuals. So the way we fix this, this is what differential privacy is we can add a little bit of random noise to the statistics before we share them. So, and it's a little hard to conceptualize, but imagine, we're adding a little bit of randomness to the data so that it no longer can be identifiable to one single person, hence what I was mentioning earlier. And so basically you get this thing called a privacy budget, epsilon. And if you, increase epsilon, you get stronger privacy. And if you decrease it, you get noisier signal. So it's basically a trade-off. Do you want it to be more private or do you want it to be closer to the original data? And it's, there's no right answer. It just depends on your scenario, but it's like a knob you're turning, right? You can make it more private or you can make it more accurate. And here's a quick analogy. This is what I had first learned with differential privacy, and I think helps a lot. So imagine you have a class where the teacher is trying to ask a yes or no question to the class. She's trying to figure out, maybe what percent of the class said yes, what percent of the class said no. So instead of just getting the students' direct answers, what the teacher does is she says, hey, I'm going to ask you a question, and then you're going to flip a coin. If the coin lands heads, answer truthfully. If the coin lands tails, answer at random. So now what this does is that for any individual student, the teacher doesn't really know their true answer. It could have been that they answered truthfully, or it could have been that they answered at random. So every individual student's answer is protected. But here's the caveat. If we wanted to know the proportions of yeses or nos, that would still remain the same as if we didn't implement this coin system because we're, equally adding noise to the yeses and the nos. The true rate still emerges. So in other words, the population signal survives, but this noise hides any individual's contribution. And that's the key idea behind differential privacy is that we want to keep the global population signal, what we're trying to find, but the noise hides an individual. And that's sort of the exact same thing that we do in our framework. Okay, so now how does this work? And so how is this sort of incorporated into APPFL? So let's talk about what APPFL is first. So it stands for Advanced Privacy Preserving Federated Learning. And so it was built as an open source framework for real cross-institution federated learning. And aside from any of the built-in Python PyTorch models, you can basically go out the door running with those. They're all pre-optimized and pre-ready to go, as well as, you can implement your own models and stuff like that. Of course, you have optional differential privacy like we just talked about, and it has some client authentication roles as well. And the main gap, it's sort of filling is that this is research grade and extensible. It's not meant to be for only one use case or for only, this exact computing environment. It's meant to be very extensible and very, very modular. And so what are those modular components I'm talking about? The first one is the aggregator component. So the aggregator is sort of what visits the different sites and combines everything together, right? So Fed average, this is sort of the most common aggregator you'll see, and you can just imagine that's, just averaging each site's contribution with another's based on the sample size. Very simple, works very well. The scheduler is another component of AppFul, and the reason that's important is imagine, you have sites where, one site has a very fast computer that runs the calculation very fast, and then another site has a little bit slower or maybe busier of a computer that's not able to return the jobs back as fast. So the scheduler component, what that allows us to do is it allows us to set up synchronous and asynchronous scheduling. So, hey, we can basically time when this computer, the faster one finishes, then also the slower one will too. We can sort of schedule and time our windows so that they work better. The trainer, that is sort of the local model at the client facing at a local site. That's what sort of the trainer is. Privacy, that is global and differential and local differential privacy, what we were talking about. So you can implement that as a custom module or use the built-in one. Communicator, right? So that's another important part. It's how are we sort of sending things across different sites? If you're within a single computing environment, you can probably use MPI or gRPC. And then if you need multiple collaborations or multiple, sites around the world, and you need some kind of authentication, that's where Globus Compute comes in as the communicator. And the last thing is the compressor. These are more experimental, but if you were running a specific kind of machine learning task where you are just running into, communication hurdles, or your data size is too large, or maybe the matrices are too large, or the gradients, you can use some kind of compressor to sort of shrink your data, lose some resolution and some accuracy, but you'll be able to sort of get by on a smaller computer and a less internet bandwidth. And so just like an architecture at a glance of sort of what that would look like in an actual environment. So we have our aggregator and server combining updates. And then you would have, for example, my side here at Argonne, you guys at Covenant, and then another partner we have as well. You guys are all training locally, and the model is sort of visiting you guys and getting updates. We could do this synchronous or asynchronously. It's very modular, like I was mentioning. All these pieces can be changed out, and only the model updates across the network. So whatever, healthcare data or that you guys possess will, never be seen by us, and vice versa. Okay, so another big component of that is Globus Compute. So you can recall that Appful is the aggregator and the server. It's sort of the one handling the federation. But how do we, get a job to happen once it's online with this federation? So everyone's connected, but how do we sort of send that signal that, hey, we need to execute something, or we need to make something happen? That is where Globus Compute comes in. So it's a secure execution layer. So you can imagine that like the HPCs at all these different universities, right? They are firewalled and they don't have outside internet access, or they can't just generally be probed to keep doing jobs. It's a security risk, of course. So what can happen then instead is that we have this Globus compute layer running above everything, and that sort of will tell the cluster, hey, I need you to run this job. I need you to run this job. I need you to run this job. So Globus compute is sort of an abstraction layer above the HPC clusters that can sort of actually send out the execution. And, for a big experiment, you can't just basically, manually coordinate all that. So that's where Globus comes in. And so, yeah, the two ideas sort of built in that we've been around. We have differential privacy, the coin flip. We need to add noise because even those summary statistics are not safe. And then we need secure aggregation, which is the federation part. Okay, so we have a framework and we understand how federated learning works. How do we actually get this to an experiment, and what are sort of the use cases? So imagine a problem where, and this is a very common problem in biomedical research, but several institutions have, genomic data or health data for their patients. But imagine this, at each individual site, they don't have enough data, or they don't have enough patients maybe to reliably detect a signal. So, they have some data, but it's not quite enough to find the discovery that they're looking for. Um, Now, together, all these sites would, but again, we are running into the same thing of medical laws and compliance. They can't send their data out like that. So, of course, and you guys know the answer to this, what is the way to sort of solve this problem without sharing the data? Federated learning plus differential privacy through a framework like AppFul. So genomics is really the ideal case for federated learning. There are some cases where it happens on like phones or smaller scenarios, but genomics is really the biggest stress test because it's sensitive, it's already distributed, and you have uneven amounts of samples, and it's these are important problems that we want to solve. So the first case that we're looking to do with, or the first case that is most useful with a federated setup is a GWAS. So a GWAS is a genome-wide association study. And so basically what we're doing is we're going across the entire human genome, or maybe even a single chromosome, and we're looking for what variant is associated with a disease or a trait or just any general kind of phenotype. So maybe we're trying to find out what is the genetic component of diabetes or BMI or anything like that. We're going across the genome, we're doing a statistical association test, and we're seeing, hey, which of these are associated. So you can imagine the genome is very, very large, and genome-wide significance is very, very high. So in order to actually get a p-value that passes, or to find something significant, in other words, you need very large sample sizes for that. So almost always an individual local site, they're not going to have enough data to do this. So hence why we need to federate this. So you can imagine, we're trying to do some research on diabetes, and our cohort in, Illinois and the United States is too small. But if we build a cohort across many different countries, right, and we increase our sample size, then suddenly that becomes a signal that is recoverable. And so basically what we've done with AppFul is we've done a genome-wide association study, this GWAS, on synthetic data. So synthetic data meaning it was 1,000 genomes genotypes. So these are real people in England, I believe, who had their genome sequenced. And then we added a synthetic phenotypes, or a synthetic trait of interest, just something we can sort of manipulate on our own and track. And then we sort of did the association study. So we did 5 sites all across the world, and we basically set it up with Amazon Web Services. And so in this basically study, the goal was basically to show that, hey, if we can do this in a federated manner, you get the same accuracy as if you did it locally. And then that's basically what we saw. Because if we did everything locally, we know it's going to be the right answer, but the problem is that'll never work in the real world. So we want to show that in a federated manner, the federation achieves the same accuracy, or maybe it's only a little bit worse than if everything was local. And so that's what we validated. And this was sort of a demo we did that we can see on YouTube. And so this is a plot from this GWAS we did. And so basically, what we're seeing here, of course, is the significance at a given region in the chromosome. So when you see these, it's called a Manhattan plot because it looks like buildings, sort of like towers. So when we see these tall spikes like that, we basically know that, hey, this is a region that is very likely to be associated with the disease or the trait or the phenotype we are looking at. And so doing it in a federated manner, we were still able to recover these signals. You want to see these towers because that means you're finding a proper signal. And this is probably the really important part of why we want to actually federate this, is that multi-ancestry matters a lot. So in the blue right there is in simulation, if I only did a European ancestry GWAS, right? So you can see we got all these towers and only one in sort of this right-hand region. And on the bottom is when I did the same simulation, but with African ancestry. And so what you can see here is that on the bottom, on this right-hand side, we have an entire new tower that is not represented in the top of the graph, the European ancestry only. And so what this really means is that in the current setup, if you're using only a centralized biobank, they're only going to have a limited number of ancestries to look from. And the results from that GWAS are not going to generalize well. In other words, they can't be used across other populations. However, if that GWAS was done in a multi-ancestry environment where we have access to, a bunch of different ancestries and we can sort of stratify across them, then these results generalize and they end up, being more accurate and helping more people total. So it's really important that we, of course, do research in a multi-ancestry way. And more importantly, we need a means to realistically do that. And of course, that's what federated learning solves. And okay, so in terms of the GWAS, basically what we're going from here is so the models I showed you were simple linear regression models, either linear regression if it was a trait that was continuous, or logistic regression for a binary trait. There are more advanced association engines such as Sage or Regini. So these engines handle relatedness and case control. So the next thing is this has not been done before. We want to incorporate those into a federated manner to get more accurate results out of it. There's also other cohorts coming on board from different universities and different research centers across the world. And again, this was all with synthetic data, and it's once we have a strong proof of concept and we've basically red teamed and security tested it, it's time to use real phenotypes at that point. And so this is sort of the current project that we're doing with Covenant University. It's called Federated Fine Mapping, or FedFM. So just a quick introduction of what fine mapping is. So if you recall that previous section on the genome-wide association study, that gives us entire regions of interest, but it doesn't really tell us which specific variant is the cause. Because of something called linkage disequilibrium, what happens on the genome is that even if there's only one true variant that's causing a disease or a phenotype, all the ones around it sort of go up with it in significance. So the next step of that analysis pipeline is you take those GWAS results and you do what's called a fine mapping. And a fine mapping is looking to sort of build a 95% credible set, as in this is the most likely set of variants are actually causal. And so you can sort of see in this graph here, this graph represents the 95% credible site. And these here are basically the most likely to be truly causal of a variant. And so the reason we want to tackle this task is this task is very hard to federate. GWAS is easier to federate, but this task is very hard to federate because you need to share something called the LD matrix with all sites. And you can imagine sharing with all sites, that's the main problem we keep running into is that that's not something we can't move data like that. So this is sort of the next step in what we're trying to federate. But the benefit of it is that fine mapping tends to generalize very well. So if you basically find a small set of causal variants in a fine mapping, that result will probably generalize very well across different human populations. And it's more useful to anyone. And so what I was mentioning a little bit earlier, that's where the linkage disequilibrium matrix falls in. So linkage disequilibrium is basically as one variant goes up in significance or in correlation with the phenotype, they all do. So when they all do that, it's almost anything nearby does it. It becomes impossible to separate what the true causing variant is or what is just correlated signal. And of course, what we're interested in is, hey, what is the variant that's actually moving sort of this phenotype of interest? We don't want the other ones. We just want that one. And the real kicker to it is that linkage disequilibrium is ancestry specific. So imagine we're looking at the same trait across different ancestry groups. And we know it's going to be in approximately the same regions. The actual distribution of that linkage disequilibrium, sort of that how those towers go up, is going to be different in each population. So if we just use the same LD matrix for everyone, then it's going to be wrong. It's going to lead to the wrong credible site because we're overgeneralizing. And if we just do it locally at each site, then each site doesn't understand the full picture. So we still are probably going to be wrong. And it's not going to be the best results we can get. So we need some way to build this LD matrix in a way that's shareable and federated so that the individual data still never leaves, but we can have this LD matrix be used across all the different sites doing their association studies. And so for federated fine mapping, there's a tool that does it very well. It's called SUSIX. It does cross-ancestry fine mapping, but it expects each summary statistics and LD matrices in one place. And for us, that's a no-no because that tool means it's only useful at an individual site the way it is. So FedFM, what we're building right now, it computes each site's summary statistics locally, and then it builds a sort of global LD matrice. And so you can imagine when we're building that LD matrice, that again is going to be something that could potentially leak data. So that's where the differential privacy component, which I thought was important to touch upon. Differential privacy is going to be used when building that LD matrix to ensure that you can't re-identify anyone from that. So sites share those summaries, not individual level genomes, and the federation assembles them into joint multi-ancestry credible sets. So yeah, the LD sharing that's the main technical challenge in this problem, and we need to handle that in a very specific way so that we can have those good results that generalize across populations, but it also still has privacy safeguards. And so yeah, as the partnership stands right now, it's with you guys. We have another university in Abu Dhabi that we're working with, and then of course Argonne. So by looking at a sort of mixed demographic like this of European, African, and Middle Eastern ancestry, these cohorts would really help produce results for maybe diseases that we've already looked at, maybe newer diseases, maybe newer phenotypes or older ones. But these results would sort of generalize a lot better through the fine mapping. And so, yeah, where we're going with that is that these multi-ancestry credible sets computed in a federated manner, right? And combining these ancestries into narrow credible sets, fewer candidate variants and sharper causal resolution. That's the key word I want you to remember, is that that sharper resolution means that, before we have this big skyscraper of all these possible variants that are associated with a disease or phenotype. And if we get that sharper resolution, then it's really only dialing us into a couple. And that's really going to help drug developers down the line or clinicians when sort of treating that. And then the sort of the differences in populations, that becomes a feature, not a nuance, not a nuisance, sorry. Because then that difference is what helps us sort of bring more detail into our study. The shared scientific goal with Covenant is, discover valid results that are valid across populations, not just one. Find mapping, finds us that likely cause and it generalizes well. And so another thing I want to talk about that's really important is that in a federation, we can set it up very easily. We can get it running. You can have an endpoint. We already thought about how to schedule the tasks. We already thought about how to authenticate, building that Globus layer. But there's another layer that actually matters a lot if you're trying to build robust long-term infrastructure, right? So instead of, if we can build it for a single individual experiment, we can run our experiment, get our results, and that could be the end of the story. But if you wanted to sort of have something that's more living, something that stays in place and that can be used for multiple studies over and over again, and sort of that's staying maintained and working, then that's where standards come in. And we need to sort of adopt, concrete and well-defined standards on how to use these machines. So a federation is only as strong as its weakest integration. Without standards, that means, every site may be adding, boilerplate or gluing code in to spots that it doesn't belong, and that's more chances to break. So standards bias interoperability. So being able to speak the same language sort of for different partners on different sites. They give us reproducibility and trust, of course. When you have standards that have been tested and red teamed, building on top of those means you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but your data is coming with sort of a more robust nature. And so there's one key organization, and when it comes to genomic data and the standards, it's the GA4GH. It's the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. So they build a lot of standards on when it comes to data use and protections on genomic data. And that is sort of what AppFul uses for its internal management and sort of any standards that we are currently adopting. So there's four GA4GH standards that are important for AppFul. And I think, in any kind of federated manner, whether you use AppFul or not, you want to use some kind of data standard. And for genomics data, this is sort of the gold standard, sort of the best one. DRS stands for Data Repository Service. So what you can imagine is that we add a stable ID or a stable name or identifier to pieces of data. So what that means is, even if data moves around, maybe on one local site is having a maintenance day, or they're restructuring their servers, or whatever else may be happening, the data itself keeps a stable identifier, and therefore it can be queued in the same exact manner that it was before. No code needs to change. So that's DRS. Another one is Task Execution Service. This is very similar to Globus Compute, and they sort of work interoperably. But it's basically, hey, can we submit, a task that a compliant site can run? And we want that to be portable and in sort of a universal language that everyone can sort of, every machine on different networks, no matter what kind of kernel they're using, or whether they're using Slurm or PBS, we want them all to be able to sort of speak the same execution language. Tool registry service is another one. This is a way to specify the exact tools, workflows, versions, everything like that. Sort of like Docker, right? So by doing that, you just basically have less ambiguity and more reproducibility in your software, right? You're not worried about this dependency or that dependency or this version, whatever. And the last one, which is most important for genomic works, is DUO. It stands for Data Use Ontology. So these are machine readable permissions for what the data may used or may not be used for. And so, what that really looks like is we can sort of assign these DUO ontologies to, let's say, genomic data. We say this data can be used for genome-wide association studies. It can be used for fine mapping, but it cannot be used for, individual clinical data reasons. So we can basically specify in sort of a machine readable and sort of like a programmatic way, what can this data be used for and what can't it be used for? And that really helps, give a layer of security and sort of peace of mind to people that are in research discovery cohorts and in EHR. So you can imagine, when you have these full stack of standards running, you're really setting yourself up for a system that is well maintained and easy to sort of implement and sort of see where things break and where they don't. And so, the main things that it comes down to is we want good standards. We want them to be portable across institutions. We want scale, right? We want biobank scale cohorts. We want clinical pilots. We want more partners, of course. And for science, we want to have multi-ancestry discoveries. It's very important that, the results we find, they generalize well to other sites and that they are able to, sort of bring the findings of one group to another and sort of benefit everyone, right? And another thing based on that same thing is that these results should be valid everywhere. And just thank you guys for listening. Just some quick acknowledgements. My lab group, the Maduri group, and the Data Science and Learning Division, you guys for hosting me. I appreciate it. The other collaborator, MBZ UAI, and then the APPFL and GA4GH communities. When I share these slides, you guys will be welcome to do it, but uh, there's going to be a link to the GitHub for AppFul. That's where you can clone the repository, poke around yourself, implement new features, see how it works, see examples. Globus is the function as a service compute layer that orchestrates everything. That's in the docs there. My lab's website, if you want to check it out or reach out to any of us. And there's a video demo as well about setting up AppFul, how we did that experiment with the 5 different sites. It's a live demo on YouTube you could watch. The GA4GH, really important one too, I would recommend checking out. It's their standards, how they implement it, what kind of projects they're doing, and how they develop these technologies. And then this last one is sort of just more of like an info and a good read on differential privacy and federated learning. And thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Dr. Lawa?
Okay.
So sorry about that. I didn't know I wasn't muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
We can hear you, Dr. Lawa.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. Sir Matthew, thank you so much. That was awesome. So yes, I can see students clapping already. I'm sure some of them have questions. Participants also in the house. So yeah, please let's harvest questions, feedback for 10 minutes.
Sure, of course.
So please, if you have question, you can unmute yourself, ask your question, or you want to drop it in the chat box.
Yeah, where's my discount? Trying to, yeah. Good evening.
Good
Good
evening,
evening.
sir.
Oh, thanks so much. That's a very wonderful one. My name is Mpa Odim. I jumped from Mountain Top University. Very exciting presentation. I just want to ask about two, maybe I think maybe the third one will be like clarification.
Sure.
From what, I've gotten from you, I just want to clarify. So it means that every site that has to be in the federated system must have HPC. Must there be HPC in every, because when you were in one of the slide, I know, you mentioned rural lab, you mentioned covenant, and, I was seeing HPC in each one of those things.
Yeah, great question. Great question. I'm going to say honestly, no, it doesn't need to be an HPC. Of course, it's going to depend on, the compute needs of the experiment and, how much computation you need. But, I've even set a federation up with Apple between 2 laptops. If it's something that can run on a laptop, you can federate it that way and it could just run between laptops. It could be, a desktop computer, a home server. It could really be anything. There's no hardware sort of lockout to any of it. The only thing that really matters is, how is it going to submit the job? So on the HPC clusters, that's from Globus, and then it's Slurm or PBS. But on a laptop, it can be a lot more direct through just Python or something like that. But yeah, definitely not only HPC. You can run it on anything. You can even run it on your laptop if you wanted.
Okay, thanks so much. So the second question, I think I'm just trying to ask for, are there certain requirements that are needed in terms of maybe data type, the features, that should be common to the various sites before the learning can be effective?
That is a really good question. Yes. So before you even begin the experiment, this is sort of done through the web portal a little bit, but the every site needs to be on the same page about, sort of what the problem is they're trying to do. So in that, they need to say, okay, we all have these, maybe same genetic number, not of course the same data, but our data is this many chromosomes. We have data from 1 to 3 chromosomes, and then we have, this phenotype recorded in this way. So the data does need to be not necessarily the same format because we can do some harmonizing in APPFL, but we need to make sure that every site has the same kind of data. So if we're doing, like a diabetes study and one site doesn't have diabetes data at all, then that site won't be able to participate. It won't be useful. But so every site needs the same kind of data, but it doesn't have to necessarily be in the same format because we can harmonize it later on.
Okay, thank you. Just the last one. In the presentation, the block structure for LD matrix, I noticed that I'm not very sure. Is it a diagonal matrix? Because
Yes,
I
exactly.
noticed. Okay, yes. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Basically, what you're seeing on that diagonal is that correlated variants, they sort of cluster together. So those like very red regions, I guess purely across the diagonal is, all the actual regions against themselves. But those regions represent, hey, this entire region goes up with that causal variant at a time, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. I'm okay. I'm satisfied. Thanks so much for the presentation.
Thank you for the great questions.
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Thank you. Yeah, I can see someone is trying to raise up. Then I'm trying to locate there who the person is. Okay, Mr. Okay, Monday. Please, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
And thank you very much, Matthew, for the wonderful presentation. I just need a clarification. And when you were presenting, so you were talking about that each center run the code on the data, and then the weight is shared across, and then the weight goes to the main site where it's being collated, and then the updated one is distributed across centers. So my question is that, if my weight, let's say I have a center, and then at the center I trained the model on my data, and then I send the weight to I send it across. Now, if there is data, maybe there is disparity between my own data set and the data set of another center, I want to be sure, how does this federated learning handle that part? Is it that what I'm training is not building on what let's say center B has trained? Am I continuing the training from scratch? Am I starting from the scratch, or I'm continuing on what other center has trained on? So I just want to be sure.
Okay, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're basically saying, almost at what time are you and center, or what time are center A and B sort of coming together? If you're giving weights and they're giving weights, how does that sort of come together? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yes, yes, yes.
I can actually pull that slide back up, but if you recall in sort of the design of this software, there was many different components, right? So one of them was the scheduler. So that is the job of basically, let me see if I can share my screen again. Yeah, so one of those components is the scheduler. And so the scheduler basically, that's where you decide, hey, do I want to receive every site's updates at once? Do I want to receive them one by one? Is one site faster or slower than the other? So if you can imagine a scenario where two sites are sort of giving weights, and let's say they're at different times, you can basically decide the default behavior of when one comes in, immediately update the other one, or you can say, okay, let one come in and then let another come in and then combine them together. Um, So that's between actually, yeah, the scheduler and the aggregator too. The aggregator, that's what Fed averages basically do everything one time per round. So at the end of a round, it'll take everyone's inputs, do it one time, and then Fed asynchronous means it's going to do it multiple times asynchronously with other sites. So to answer your original question, if both sites are contributing weights and they're doing it at different times, or they're contributing, maybe you contribute first, maybe they did, that's going to be on the scheduler to just sort of decide how it wants to do this. I think the most simple setup is that it's only done once. So what happens is every site trains locally, and then once every site is done, then it's all combined together at one time, only one time. But you could set it up another way that instead of only one time, it's updating every single time. But again, yeah, that's
Okay.
configurable.
All right. Thank you very much.
Great question.
Thank you so much. I believe Mr. Okay is satisfied. Do we have any other question for Mr. Matthew? Engineer Bola, Engineer Matthew Akonde, please can you unmute yourself?
Okay,
Prof, I'm coming to you, sir. Yes, sir. Prof Bisala, I'll come to you, sir. Yeah, so Engineer Bola, please.
okay. Thank you very much, Matthew, for the wonderful presentation. Thank you for all the answer you have also been given to the questions raised. Just from the question that Monday Okay asked, something just came to my mind, asking about the data now. I think he was also trying to ask, because that question is also running through my mind, in a case where a particular node is training on a different kind of data, and then how will the federation get to know in the process of the learning to know if this data is actually the kind of data that it should be trained? For example, we're talking about GWAS study or maybe diabetics, for example. Now, the data has to do with diabetics and all that. And then probably maybe in my own node, it's a different kind of data that is being trained and a model is being built. In the course of aggregation, how will that be identified in the course of the federation of all the models?
Really good question. Okay, so I would say there's multiple levels that we're sort of gonna verify it on. So if you remember when I was talking about the standards, one of them was called DUO. It stands for Data Use Ontology. So that's going to handle one aspect of the problem, which is that we're going to make sure the piece of data that we say it is the same piece of data, no matter if it's when your site moves or changes, goes offline. That piece of data, we'll always be able to refer to it the same way. So that's one aspect. And then two, it's going to be, okay, so how do we make sure we have the same kind of data? That's really going to happen in two ways. So one is that in AppFL, when you run an experiment, there's a data loader function. And the data loader is basically when it's loading the data for every site, it's looking to make sure and see it's the same. So if it's not the same, it's immediately going to throw up an error, and it's just basically it's not going to run past that point. So that's going to be sort of your first stop, is it's not even going to be able to run if the data loader isn't able to load the same way at every individual site. And I guess so then the question becomes, if we do have an experiment we want to run, but we have different kinds of data, but it's still useful to each other, then that's when you would need to make a custom data loader with like a harmonizing kind of function. So basically, your site would need to say, okay, this is going to be my data loader, and it's going to sort of harmonize it a little differently than your site. But in the end, then it's going to be this sort of all the same format for AppFul. So okay, so to recap, it's basically we want to make sure first that the data is what we say it is, and that's how we're going to use identifiers. And then on the next level, we're all going to use the same data loader. And then even past that, if we do want to do something different, then we just need to harmonize the data at some point upstream before the actual APPFL part.
Thank you very much, Clay.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, Professor Bisala, sir.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and well done, Matthew, for the great presentation. Thank you very much. I was going to ask just a tiny three questions. The first one is, I was looking at the aggregator, and in the slide you showed, and this is kind of following up from Monday, okay's question. And I could see the option of aggregating, and one of them is the federated average, and you have the asynchronous, and I saw more. And I was just thinking, could more include like the optimum, value rather than aggregate? Sometimes getting the best site and distributing that may be more helpful sometimes than aggregating or finding the average. So I want your thought about that. Is there an option? Sometimes I may prefer to say that, okay, rather than compute average, things could go down, sometimes, because measure of central tendency are good, but then it could weaken performance of one site, whereas, the optimum value could attach penalty to the one that is performing best. So that's one. Secondly, is we interested in, and I appreciate, the GWAS kind of analysis. But in case some of us are interested in radiological data, do you have some plan on how we can, push that through so that we, for example, we have maybe MRI images in our site, and then it will be really, really good to do federated learning on that. And then I'm thinking of that. And lastly, is on missingness. So say, for example, my data, and I know there will be rules, there will be protocol actually to make us comply with the kind of data before we even set out for the federated learning. But say, for example, I've got, in my site, there are 10 sites that are actually doing federated learning, 10 nodes in this particular context. And and let's say there are features that maybe 10 features, and in one site, there is a feature that is missing. So that's a particular site has 9 features instead of 10. And it's not that because they chose not to have it, but for some, peculiarities or some shortcomings from that site, they do not have that particular value. How could that be handled in the federated learning environment? Thank you very much.
Those are all great questions. Thank you for those. Okay, I'll get to them one by one. So your first one was on basically on the network, on the aggregator. You were saying Fed average, but what if one site is a stronger performer than another or contributes more? So in some ways, that behavior is already built in. So if one site, for example, has more samples, then that site, of course, is going to have more statistical power, and it's going to take more of a weight in the contribution. But I guess if you're saying if you want to manually weight the sites, for some reason, that this site's contributions are maybe, better. Maybe the lab has better equipment, or maybe it's cleaner. You could specify custom weights for every site. You could say this site's data is to be weighed more than this other site's data, and so on and so forth. And then another thing you could try is you could do dropout testing, right? So if you think one site maybe imagine it, you think it's taking the model astray, as in the contributions it's making are not good for the model, it's sort of taking it the wrong direction. What you could do is you could run your federation. Let's say you have 5 sites. You could run your federation 5 times, and each time dropping out one of the individual sites. And you can basically see, okay, then once you've run all 5 of those, you can see, do we converge to sort of the same results? Do we converge to the same model? So to answer that first question, if you want to, so by default, it's going to, of course, prioritize sample size. But if you want, you can specify further and add custom weights. And then the second part of that being, you can actually do dropout testing, drop out a site, run the network, drop out another site, run the network. And by doing that for every single combination, then you can see if there was a particular site that's sort of moving your model the wrong direction. Okay, and then for your next question was on, you were saying radiology data and like X-rays. Yeah, right off the bat, that's actually probably an easier one to do, honestly, because it ships, so APPFL ships with all the PyTorch models. So by default, it already has, recurrent neural network, convolutional neural network. So for image data like that, you can, basically just use some kind of neural network, and you can just train it federated across each site, and it'll be able to handle that perfectly. And then
Perfect.
so you're perfect.
Thank
Any
you.
other
Please
questions?
carry on. No,
Yeah,
about the
sure.
missingness, yes, in terms of
The missing features.
yes.
Okay, so Matt, you were saying 10 nodes. Imagine, one of them only has 9 features and all of the other ones have 10, right? So I would say the best way to handle that in that situation is probably to use some kind of statistical based imputation. So what you would do is you would imagine that feature to be almost like a covariate. And then for that local site, you would sort of pollute in random values following some kind of normal distribution. And that's not a perfect way to do it. Of course, you're imputing data. It's not real data, right? But the theory would say that if you do it this way, then it's at least going to change the result the least amount of way, because you're trying to do it in a manner that's controlled. So I would say in that scenario, you don't have many choices. You can do two things. You can either leave out that feature for everybody, or you can impute it for the site that's missing it. So you have two choices there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Matthew. Yes.
Of course.
Thank you so much, Professor Aribisala. Professor Adetiba, sir.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Matthew. That was a very brilliant presentation. And I think now there's better insight to the APPFL, okay, with the way you've done the presentation and the use case. Currently there are 6 components in APPFL, and I am thinking that there's a need to extend it to maybe a 7th component that will cater for the standardization based on the GA for GH standardization that you mentioned. Well, maybe you can educate us if that is already taken care of in the APPFL framework. So I don't know whether that's a question or a contribution, as it were, but I would like you to respond to that.
Sure. So I would
Yeah.
say I understand totally what you're saying, that maybe that would be a 7th component for these standards and stuff like that. But I think a better way to imagine it is that those standards are sort of what the components speak to each other. So instead of imagining it as like an additional component, it's sort of what the components have baked into them already. So for example, when it comes to the communicator, right? The communicator uses a GA4GH standard to talk to the sites. It's not that it's like a separate, the standard is a separate component. It's that the standards are what is built into the existing components. Does that kind of make sense?
Okay, perfect. I just want to be sure that is already taken care of by the
Yep,
APPFL.
exactly.
Okay, good.
Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. In fact, this is awesome. Yeah, most of the questions that were raised, that were asked by the participant, are things that you will actually come in contact with when you're dealing with federated learning. I that was what I did for my PhD, and trust me, all of these questions came up when especially when it comes to notes with different data sets. When you cannot just use the same model updates to train there. So I think what I used during my was what I refer to as personalization model, that try to tend to the features of a particular node. So that worked for me. And another thing for the question from Professor Aribisala concerning the federated average, yes, federated average was the father of federated learning, was the one that introduced FedHav, and it's been used by almost everybody. But like for my own type of data set or the model I was trying to build, it didn't work. So I had to tweak it. I have to do another thing. So it's a whole lot of things when you are in the site, when you come in contact with this thing, more than the theoretical background and all of that. And that is why I feel our next session, we're going to go into practical so that we will be able to understand how to do this very well. Thank you once again, Matthew. It was awesome. Wonderful presentation, brilliant presentation. We're so happy to have you. Thank you for joining us. We believe that our next session will be will I say better or more interesting? Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, we keep getting better. All right. Okay, so before we go to the closing remarks, I would like to call on Professor Aribisala again for one or two comments.
Oh, thank you very much, Doctor. And this is well organized. And then I really want to appreciate the Vice Chancellor of Covenant University. And I sincerely register my appreciation to the center leader, the amiable Professor Adetiba, for giving us the opportunity. And I sincerely appreciate, Dr. Matthew Akonle for all the collaborative efforts and everybody who has participated. I was just carrying on to give appreciation. I don't know whether that is what you want me to say, but I just want to say that this is great, and we are very, very happy to be involved in this. And Matthew, you are great. We appreciate you sincerely, and please tell Ravi that we appreciate his leadership, and Ian Foster, that we are so grateful for giving us a brilliant presenter, to really wow us today. So, and I want to appreciate all the all the participants. Covenant University is known as a leading university in Nigeria, and always a great pleasure to participate, to collaborate with you. The future is even has more promises as we continue our collaboration. Thank you very much. We can't wait for the next version of this. We can't wait.
We can't wait.
Yes, we cannot. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, I was about to say, can we give a virtual clap, likes? Okay, please, virtual claps for that. Okay, yeah, Professor Aribisala, kind of you've done closing remarks in sort of way, but we'll still have our closing remarks. So for the closing remarks, I would like to call on Engineer Matthew Akonle, as the lead infrastructure engineer for in KPK's FEDGEN here in Covenant University. So, Engineer Bola, please, can you unmute yourself and just give the closing remark? Then we'll take the closing prayer and we're done.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lawa, for a very good coordination. Professor Aribisala has done most of the Thanksgiving or thanking, but especially again, I want to say thank you to Matthew for making out your time for this wonderful presentation. I want to say big thank you, and again, our greetings to Ravi for also helping from his side and also bringing you on board this tutorial. We want to say thank you. And again, I must also mention Professor Adetiba for all his efforts to just ensure that knowledge is being imparted on as many as possible, and also for bringing up this platform, the monthly advanced tutorial that we always have every month. I want to say big thank you because it has been a very great impact to every one of it, has impacted us in a very great way. So to everyone that attend this program or this training today, I say thank you for joining us. And again, we expect another one next month. We normally have our advanced tutorial every last Friday of every month. And I want to believe that the second part of this is going to be a 3-session program. Am I correct, Dr. Lawa? 3 parts, yeah. So I think the next one is coming up next month. So we invite everyone again to join us. God bless you all. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Engineer Bola. I know there is no closing remark after closing remark, but I just want to say this. Yeah, the session is supposed to be 3 parts. We had 1 last month. This is supposed to be the second one, but because of the schedule of Matthew and Dr. Ravi, they can only spare 1 hour with us. So most likely we're going to have 2 sessions next month so that we'll be able to cover everything that it's within that we tend to cover, everything we have in our curriculum. So I just needed to say that. Anyways, whichever way we decided to go, we'll definitely share the link with you. Thank you for joining us. So let's go straight to the closing prayer. I think I can see our infrastructure engineer, another infrastructure engineer, that's engineer Mrs. Sweet Williams, if she's in the house. Ma, can you please unmute yourself and pray for us? Give us a closing prayer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lawal. Let's pray. Father, we want to appreciate you for a beautiful session. Thank you for having begun with us. Thank you for having taken us through the session, for opening our understanding, for utterance, for our resource person. Thank you for the beautiful questions. Thank you for knowledge that has been imparted. And above all, for the future we see that is bright. Thank you, Lord. Even as we conclude this meeting, we ask that your grace continue with us. And we ask specifically as we go and look through what we have been taught, we ask that value will come out of what we have received. Thank you for the organizers. Thank you for the participants. Receive our thanks. In Jesus' name we have prayed.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Amen.
See you next month. Bye.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Great. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you guys. Great to be here.
Okay.
Thank you, Matthew. Bye.